A very good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this wonderful chat series that we've been having. And I think really privileged now to have with us Shaheen Mistri. This one is on the focus on the right to education for all. I think Shaheen has been one of the key people, I would say, not only in India but in the world, who has really championed the cause of education, a universal education, and that too at the highest level that can be delivered. And it's more a right for everyone. She's the CEO of Teach for India, of course, serves as one of its founding board members. Of course, she also started Akanksha. And I still remember, Shaheen, the initial days, when you had set that up, such a phenomenal, institution that really, captured what the city slums children, needed, both in terms of skills and education, to be able to make themselves, members of society that can add and contribute, to our country. And I think we've done a phenomenal job with so many centers and schools, particularly around Mumbai and Pune, but also the Teach for India, Teach for America. Shaheen has been an Ashoka Fellow, a Global Leader of Tomorrow for the World Economic Forum, Asia Society 21 Leader. So many accolades, but I know you as a person, Shaheen, and for you, all of that, it doesn't any way take away what you stand for, what you represent, and what you truly feel at the core of your heart, right? And that's how India can really, educate our masses, and every Indian has an education that is, competent enough to get them a very worthwhile livelihood, and also then create a larger impact, on society. So the idea today is to capture your thoughts, your vision for India, your dreams for India, but, particularly given that education is something that, is prime to you. Maybe we'll start with that, and really keeping the present education system of the country in mind, what's working well and what isn't. Maybe two things that are working well and two things that you think are not working as well, or what can we do? Maybe we start with that.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I think, look, a lot is working well. I go back to when I started my work 30 years ago, and I think the first big shift is people really are talking about the need for educational change. And I always believe that when dialogue has started, when more and more people come on board and care about this, when the policies of the land are reflecting that dialogue, you're in a good place. And so I would say the first is broadly just education has become part of the conversation. It's become part of the dialogue. It's become part of what we really care about, we're talking about, we're working for. So that to me would be the first big one. I think the second is probably at the intersection of access. I think we've made really big strides as a nation to get education to be accessible to almost all our children. Many kids still falling through the cracks, but to almost all of our children. And I think we've made a big push, most recently, elevated to a national mission with foundational literacy and numeracy. So I think those are some of the pieces that are working well. I think the two pieces that I think perhaps we don't talk enough about that feel very, very important to talk about. One is just the need for more and more leadership at all levels, focused on education. I think today still it is not a top 3 choice for bright young people to become teachers, to get into the education sector. And you see that mirrored at all levels of the system. I think unless we change who gets excited, who comes into education, the value proposition for people to enter the sector, we're not going to get as far as we want. I think that's the first. I think the second, which I really think a lot about, you'll probably hear me reference this multiple times through the conversation, is we still think of children only as the beneficiaries of education, but we don't really give them a stake in the education system. We're not listening to our children. We're not asking them, why do you want to learn? How do you want to learn? What do you want to learn? We're not engaging them as equal partners in this work. And I think that is a huge missed opportunity. Student voice, student agency, student partnership, in really saying, how do I take control of my own education and the education of others?
No, I think your second point is so valid. And if we are able to at least involve this generation of children into that, hopefully we'll get a lot more of them choosing education as a career, to address your first problem, because they'd be so involved in kind of shaping that. So if we have missed one generation, maybe we can now make sure that the next generation of leaders in education comes out of this proactive kind of involvement. So I think very, very great point. And hopefully over these next 25 years, which a prime minister likes to call the Amrit Kal, the emerging of a new India, we'll be able to see this emergence of children who will then become educators as we move forward. But I think there has been, on a policy side also, Shaheen, a lot of work that has happened, right? Particularly with this new education policy, with right for education for all. I mean, you've seen this over 30 years, right? So how significant is this change, and really what does it change on the ground when it comes to education, and how can stakeholders really participate to make a difference using this policy differently, given that you must have studied this quite closely?
Yeah, I mean, I really am a big fan of the policy. You go through and you read it and you almost wonder if you can visualize a single school in India across any income level that actually embodies everything in the policy. So I think as a guiding document, as a document that really is of the highest ideals, it's a beautiful, uplifting, inspiring document. I think, like with everything, Rajan, it breaks down in implementation. And I think what you said at the end is so important. Unless we as stakeholders and civil society say, we're going to make this happen, we're going to each empower ourselves, our own families, our own schools to actually implement this. There's too much of a gap between what we see on the ground and the policy. I think we need to, one, allocate adequate resources to make a policy like that happen. I think still today, unfortunately, we are a nation that doesn't invest enough in education. With what we invest, the vast majority of it goes to teacher salaries, leaving us very little wiggle room for other areas of change. So I think we need to think about that. I go back again to the people point. Unless we're investing a lot in who we bring into the sector, how we value them, how we reward them, how we invest in their ongoing development, we're not really going to be able to move very far with the policy. So I think, no silver bullet answers is my perspective. It's going to take time, thought, really good people, adequate resources, and a lot of belief. I think one thing I worry a little bit about in India is because the problem is so vast and so deep, and education is such a difficult thing to solve. We tend to look for the silver bullet solution, and we tend to say, how can we make incremental change at scale? And while that matters, we must remember as a nation that that is not enough. Even foundational literacy and numeracy, that is one step forward, but that is not what children need ultimately to lead successful, meaningful lives. So how do we, in addition to resources and people, also hold a high enough bar and say we will put in the resources to get to that place versus lowering the bar year after year?
Yeah, I think this whole exercise of India at 100 is to really create that order of magnitude change, to think disruptively, to really aspire for the highest possible outcome. And then, if you fold the future back, you need to innovate. What you rightly said. Not only do you need the right resources, but you also need that innovative mindset, right? And especially in a country like India, where there is scale, there is always a much larger potential for innovation because the frugality that can come out of that exercise or the price performance that we are able to achieve in a country like India is far better or superior to any other part of the world, especially when we look at the Western countries. The cost of what it takes to educate someone and what the outcome is, of course, there is high, but in India, we can do a lot more with probably a lot less if we get it right. But you still said that the teacher salaries is the highest cost, and still, I think our teachers are underpaid, right? I mean, when we come, maybe that's the reason people don't join the profession. But as Teach for India, Shaheen, I think you've created a phenomenal model, right? That is addressing this leadership deficit, particularly when it comes to education, in India. And really, how does that translate, right, to a larger, vision for education where you can get other stakeholders aligned? See, we see a lot of pockets of excellence in India. But if there's one big initiative that's working well, I think one thing we'd love to see as the India at 100 Foundation moving forward, and especially India at 100, is to see how we can align more interesting, and committed stakeholders around larger visions that are working well, right? And help scale that. So I know Teach for India is a phenomenal model. There's a Teach for America. You've done that. I mean, throw some light and how can others get involved?
Yeah. I think, Rajan, many years ago, I went to a conference in Florida, and I remember nothing about that conference except one thing, which is when we walked into the room, there was a multiplication sign on the screen. And that concept of the multiplier has stayed very, very present for me through these years. See, Teach for India is essentially a multiplier, and I think that's why it works. What we say is that we will run a 2-year intensive fellowship for really bright young people, right? So our belief is that our nation needs our brightest people to focus on education. In the short term, we actually only have about 1,000 fellows teaching, and they teach 32,000 children, right? Drop in the bucket. But because the investment is in them as leaders, and leadership is such a powerful multiplier, as alumni post the 2 years, today they are reaching 33 million children because they are going on to work in policy, in curriculum development, in teacher training, in ed tech. And that's, I think, how we need to think in India. We need to say which models go deep, because education is about depth, but which models multiply. And for that, I keep coming back to an investment in leadership. If you invest in one leader, we may have a Tarun Cherakuri who has worked as a Teach for India fellow, only really teaching 25, 30 kids in the 2 years. But today runs a program called Indus Action, which is getting lakhs and lakhs of children to enroll in school through the right to education. So again, the multiplier model is what I think makes Teach for India powerful. The other interesting thing, I don't know if you're familiar with the researcher Erica Chenoweth, but she studied a lot of social movements around the world and come up with this, rough formula that if you can engage 3.5% of people in a particular issue, you can actually bring about a tipping point. And so Teach for India is obsessed with this number now, saying in our regions, if we can get 3.5 people beyond our immediate community to engage with educational equity, will there be a powerful ripple? So again, I think when you break that down, Rajan, the importance of proof points in India is very significant. I know the government thinks a lot about, can we scale? Can we reach all children? And that is, of course, our ultimate aim. But we're still at a place where we don't believe as a nation. When people see my Teach for India kids, they say, oh, wow, they can speak English. Oh, my goodness, they're going to college. We don't believe that you can, with great opportunity, overcome the disadvantage of your background. So I think we need a lot of proof points, and then we need a lot of models that are able to be disruptive enough to multiply depth work at scale.
No, I think what you rightly said, broad basing, this entire process of people having the basic skills, but then also pushing for excellence, right? Because ultimately your fellows are those ones who are the brightest and who are creating change. And I think again that's a very virtuous cycle, and of course I mean the more I'm talking to you, the more I'm convinced that forget what has happened so far, but over the next 10 years, if we can get the right kind of children attention, delivered and have them participate in this process, that funnel for the next generation of leaders who will champion this cause passionately will come before we hit India at 100 probably,
Yeah.
But there's a lot changing, right, in education. I mean, you mentioned it briefly before, it's so strongly student-centric, person-centric, learner-centric today from the other side, and I think how does one really look at education, right? Future skills, there's so much of information on Google, we always say, is that truly education? What's the difference between knowledge and applying, information in different ways, interdisciplinary, So how is the world of education changing? And I think more importantly, what can India do to prepare for it, right? I think, because you're also grassroots connected here.
Yeah.
What's on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is like my favorite question, because I think it all starts with really asking and expanding the definition of education. Again, because of the burden of scale and numbers, we've made tremendous progress in momentum towards skilling. And yet education still today in India is essentially competition to get into a college, to get a job, to start that cycle again with your kids. And while there are pockets, as you said, of interdisciplinary, socio-emotional learning, and we see these examples around the world, the typical Indian school does not embrace that vision of education. To us, we sort of boil the purpose of education at Teach for India down to three things. We say, first and foremost, it is about self. And by self, we mean it is about giving children the opportunity to discover who they are, their purpose in the world, and then to develop the skills to get the livelihood of their choice, right? So that's the first part. That's generally where education stops. We're saying there are two other components. The second is what we're calling other. That education is not just about me. Actually, a lot of the problems in our country and our world exist because of that definition of education. Education is equally about, am I learning each day how to care for the other, how to be more open-minded, how to embrace different perspectives, and how to actually create opportunities for others to reach their potential. So that's sort of part two. And part three, perhaps most importantly, is what we call India. Education is about understanding our country and about really acting towards becoming a responsible citizen in the country. And so we sort of break that down and say the highest law of our land is enshrined in our constitution, and actually in the 4 ideals in the preamble of our constitution. If our children from grade 1 and 2 were practicing actions linked to equality, fraternity, justice, and liberty, they would grow up fundamentally different. And my argument is the country would look very different at the end of it. So really, if we start with that, Rajan, and we say education is about self, other, and India, children come to school not just to score well on exams, but they come to school to unleash their greatest potential and to unleash the potential of others and to make the country better. I think everything we plan and measure in education will look different and will flow down from there.
No, truly a beautiful definition for education. Again, what you rightly said, I think it is clearly reflective of the experience that you have had, and where this needs to go. And I think there are different sets of stakeholders who can contribute to each of those pieces, right? Because it will require a lot of investment, action to happen, especially when you take what you are able to do to your optimal potential and then use that for others, I think we are creating, a phenomenal ecosystem. And I know industry has a big role to play in that, Shaheen, because I mean, I'm aware of some of the details of what Thamax and, people like Anu and Meher have helped support in Teach for India and brought, but industry people who have done well, contributing to this cause, actually making it, their largest, deliverable or goal as one move forwards. And given that this entire movement of India at 75 leading to India at 100 has been anchored with industry and then bringing multiple stakeholders together, what role do you think industry can play, moving forward? Is it more towards, creating robust infrastructure, more equitable, distribution of education? So one on the macro side, and then, I'm sure you have so many examples of a grassroots level of, a change. So some role on what industry can do.
Yeah, I mean, so much. And really the answer is all of the above and much more. But, to me, I break industry down into human beings. And I think today, just as a person living in India, as a person from India, like it's no longer our prerogative to say we don't care. Like there's too much that needs to be fixed around us if we care about the India that we leave to our children and our grandchildren. So my short answer is, if everybody just looked in the mirror and said, not what little can I do, but how can I do the maximum that I can possibly do? And can I do it realizing that it will help the country, but really, really cognizant of how fundamentally it will change me as a human being. This has been my single most consistent lesson across 30 years. I came into this work as a very rebellious 18-year-old, really thinking I had a lot to contribute. And I've learned again and again and again that the more you give, the more you get back. And I think that is the reason really to do it. And I think if we cultivate that as individuals, then industries will naturally take on the role that they have. There is so much expertise within industry. And there are just so many resources, and the obvious ones are the financial resources. I think, organizations like ours also, being a larger NGO in the country, still struggle to even raise 1 year's money in advance, right? So funding continues to be one of the top 3 challenges for the sector, and really inhibits us for doing the level and volume of work we're able to do. So that's a very obvious one. But I think the one that I found equally, if not more important, is the human capital that sits in industry. The strategic inputs, a lot of people in the NGO sector, like myself, came in just as passionate human beings, nothing else, no skill sets at all. And I think what you're able to get when you partner and can tap into the expertise, the infrastructure, the technology of industry is just massive. So I see it as an absolute partnership going forward. If we're to make any, really shift the needle on any development issue, we can't do it without industry as a significant partner.
We one of the things that we really took up very strongly is this entire skilled volunteering piece, because what you rightly said, there's so many, very, very attractive and, very, I would say, people who can create tremendous impact within industry. And, we don't know how to deploy a large part of those resources. Also, how do NGOs and others measure the impact of what those people have, right? So we did a whole, kind of a program. We were able to value that not as a CTC to the company, but to what the NGO benefited, got it into a part of the 2% CSR, spend that is there. But I still think that what you rightly said, there is so much to unlock there, right? And I think maybe a technology platform or some way, whether Teach for India and India Cellular Foundation can work together to see what can really mobilize that, because I think the intent is very similar from industry too, right? It's about how do we get it to happen again at scale, and maybe that's one follow-up agenda or follow-on agenda for us to work together on, to see how we can get, more industry people. The funding will anyways come when your own people are involved. So I think that also is a very,
Yeah, Rajan, I also think the opportunity that many of us sort of woke up and realized through the pandemic of a new form of education, which we're loosely calling this blended education. I think many of us realized very obvious truths through the pandemic, that learning doesn't need to be limited to a classroom, that learning doesn't have to be limited to the teacher in front of the classroom, that learning doesn't happen during instructional hours. This opens up a very powerful channel for industry and individuals in industry to contribute directly to the last mile beneficiary. Because you can take out half an hour a week sitting in your office, delivering a high quality education or mentorship directly to students. And I think that unleashes tremendous possibility if, again, we can figure out the matching behind that.
No, that was the whole idea, right? If we can build a technology platform that supports that, right? Also, not only matches, but creates, like the Zoom kind of a interface for you to be able to, both in a hub and spoke model or a one-on-one basis, engage with people, very holistic. I think it could be a pretty large contribution. I know everybody has tried it in pieces, and even we did something on that, but I think a high-class product somewhere there could be a big, good initiative for us to take on. And of course, I'm sure the government would also be very supportive of an initiative like that. But also, I think this technology is going to probably help us, get better gender parity when it comes to literacy between male and female in the country. I don't know, but, that's again an area that I know probably you're also very passionate about. But, how do we bridge that gap, right? If we're talking of India at 100, India 2047, the opportunity for a girl child or a male child to get educated or forget the opportunity, actually getting educated, there shouldn't be any distinction. I mean, but what will make that happen?
Rajan, I feel it goes back again to the type of education we give our children. These problems will naturally go away if our own understanding of education is different. Teach for India fellows go into schools where girls are not allowed on the football team, girls and boys are not allowed to sit next to each other. And you start making these small shifts in actions and breaking this down and enabling really safe dialogue for people to have different perspectives and actually surface biases that they may have. The power of what I call the circle, right? It's simplest, lowest cost, highest potential initiative in education. Can we get people to sit around and talk to each other and share why they have biases and listen to different perspectives? And I think things will start to shift. I also think if we want greater parity for girls, we need to do a lot of education on the side of men and boys, because ultimately they're still holding the power that determines what girls are able to do in the future. And so I found that when we actually empower our boys, we're making things much better for our girls as well.
I think that's again a very different twist, and so focusing it in that manner, a large scale rollout agenda to do that, right? Not again something which is just going to hit a few, but at scale, probably included part of a curriculum. And maybe what you rightly said, where you see capacity and potential of people helping others, how does every single male person who's educated ensure that one female who is not gets it? I mean, there could be tons of ways in which one can approach something like this, right? I think very.
Yeah, and I think because you said large scale, I'm also thinking, Rajan, of the power of like campaigns and communications. And again, I think this is where industry can play a huge role. But, a girl's story makes another 100 girls' stories possible. And how do we do that? I mean, I remember being in a small school in Kashmir where I just told my story and I could see the look on those girls' faces. And essentially what I was seeing in their faces was, oh my gosh, it is possible for a girl to do something, and so I think the power of like mass storytelling and showing that this is not just possible, this can be normal, this can be the new normal, that can be very powerful.
So let's do that, right? A rebellious 18-year-old girl, like over the next 1 minute, inspire the other girl child, or 2 minutes, statements. What's the highlight of your story, Shaheen? Now that you said it, let's get a little. What's that? What is that? Those few statements in your journey or story that really, I think where you had where you think you conquered or you created something, you overcame something that was challenging in your journey.
Yeah. I mean, this is such a big question, but top of mind, a few of my most salient sort of like, I think, I don't want to say things that I am doing, but things that I am starting to do. One is just holding an incredibly high bar for children. Like, I just believe that children are limited by the bar we put on them, and they are limitless in their potential. So that idea that kids are limitless, they are precious, they are holistic human beings, and they can contribute just significantly to the world. I think that's been one of my most sort of consistent pursuits. I think the second is actually the power of love. For lack of a better phrase, I've found that to learn that the journey is one where we can love ourselves, each other, the work that we do, that is very, very, very powerful, because for all of us, when you actually love something, you're willing to do whatever it takes. And so really embracing and trying to understand the role of love towards that high bar. I think that has been a second. And the third has just been like, the tenacity, just stick it out. When people say, what are you most proud of? I'm like, I'm still here. And like, it's not that the journey hasn't gone up and down, but you start to see the most magical things if you stay long enough. And today, we have Akanksha alumni who became Teach for India fellows, who now are working on staff. And I mean, you see all kinds of unbelievable circles complete when you just stay long enough, and you see things that you never really thought would be possible. And so today, my greatest thrill comes from walking into a room and not being able to tell the difference between a fellow and a student, because they both are as articulate as each other and as insightful as each other. And, to me, that's what it's about, like that level of education.
Yeah, no, I think the most powerful emotion probably in the world, love and perseverance together can create wonders, like what you rightly said. I think that itself is very inspiring for people to continue to take up and do a lot more. And I think it is important, right? Because when we look at these kinds of people who build leadership, right, they are in the position to lead others as well. So I think this whole entrepreneurship generation that we are seeing now, especially in new age, even in this pandemic, unicorns and new age startups creating a lot of value, or even otherwise existing leaders, getting more people to take up entrepreneurial opportunities. I remember I was at a convocation, some time back, and I just asked them, how many of you want to be job creators and how many want to be job seekers? There were more people who put up their hand for being job creators, right? So this entire generational change of wanting to become entrepreneurs, right? I think is also something that our education needs to address, right? Because earlier used to be a career for a lifetime. Now it's lifetime of careers, entrepreneurship opportunities. So how can the Indian education system, again, over the next 20, 25 years, inculcate some of these aspects, deeper as a system rather than it happening, due to external environments?
Yeah, I'll come back again to the India strand of what I talked about earlier. You see, if you learn from textbooks and you have sort of a passive way of learning your whole life, you learn to become the opposite of an entrepreneur. Whereas if from the age of 5, 6, 7 years old, you're asked what bothers you around you, you're taught to identify what you care about, and you're taught a process of solving the problems around you. If you do that consistently over 10, 15 years, you are an entrepreneur at the end of it. And I think what we've found is that actually creates the deepest, most enduring form of learning. Like, I'll never forget this moment where I visited a school in New Zealand, grade 10. Their entire year's syllabus was building a 3-story house that they were going to donate to a homeless family at the end of the year. That was their syllabus. And so they were learning values, they were learning every possible academic skill. And their exam at the end of the year was not like, did you get a 97 versus a 98? It was like, when it rains, does the family get wet? Does the family enjoy the home? It was so meaningful. And so, can we really convert our education into a real world space where children are learning skills through solving things that they genuinely care about, and that are meaningful to them? I think that is what is going to embed entrepreneurship in our blood more broadly.
No, and I think, doing it in when children are still innocent, where you can inculcate all the love, perseverance, all those values alongside, unlocking your potential, but also working with others and bringing the best out of them. I think is a great model. Again, one that probably needs to be a part of every education curriculum.
Yeah.
Maybe not for a whole year, right? Like probably what New Zealand did, but maybe one project that you need to do that is significant. And I'm sure today's kids will take it to a completely different level, given the technology and all this, such a large part of it.
In fact, there's a beautiful program called Design for Change, which is freely available online and literally has simplified design thinking for children so that they can pick up any project and solve it. And I remember, like, our 8-year-old children in Chennai, they had a child who was hearing impaired in their class. That was the problem they wanted to solve. These children invented an entire sign language so that the child could feel included in class. And they were 8, 10-year-old Rehan in Ahmedabad lives in the middle of 8 mountains of garbage and decided he wanted to mobilize his entire community at 10 to solve that problem, and so you can imagine the rich learning that comes from solving a sort of larger than life problem for you. Actually, whether or not you solve it is irrelevant. It's the muscle that you build in trying to solve it. And I think that's true for our Teach for India fellows as well, because the experience is so immersive and so fraught with challenges you're trying to solve. We've actually had 160 organizations be founded by TFI alums just in the last decade. So you see how entrepreneurship very naturally gets fostered.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example of how, what you rightly said, entrepreneurship just in capacity building and talent itself is I think it's a global $1 trillion opportunity, if not more than that. And given that India has taken leadership, right? I think while in many of the new age businesses, edutech, when we talk of India has actually created global leadership in a lot of the models. And I think given that education, or the roots of education for the world in some shape and form beyond India itself, of course, 1,000-year cultural history also originated somewhere in India. It is something that we really need to take to the world. But at the same time, Shaheen, there are some great global benchmarks or a lot of things that have been done very well by other countries, right? Over these last few hundred years, which I think India can also benefit from, right? Anything that you personally take inspiration from and you feel can be a part of what we can do?
I mean, I just take inspiration all the time from everywhere. I think that would be the message I would leave people with. I mean, there's so many examples globally. You have the Green School in Bali, you have the KIPP schools in the US, closer to home. You have the Apsara Academy in Pune, you have SecMol in Ladakh. I mean, there are countless examples. There's a lot of learning to be had from the success stories and also the things that have not worked. And there's a lot of learning to be had from not just the outcome of where some of these beautiful projects are today, but the journey that they've been on. I think for me, again, it's been around like, how do you build the muscle not to reinvent? How do you take out time? It's so hard in our lives. Our lives are so busy, but how do you build the muscle to zoom out, to invest in your own learning, to carve out the time to actually visit other projects, to see where you find leverage, to shamelessly copy. I mean, I think, to make things open source. I think this is another thing we have to become better at. Like if something that TFI develops can help any child anywhere, Like, why would we put any limits on that, you know? So I think it comes down to like a mindset and an appetite and the time we create for learning. And when you do that, like, you know, it's literally buttons away to find some of these great examples.
Yeah, no, and given that we have the world's largest pool of youthful talent for the future, I think there's so many things that we probably need to do, to make that happen. And I think also, one of our key vision elements has always been, of course, implicit, universal literacy for all. But in that, creating the world's largest pool of talent, right? The largest skilled workforce is going to come from India, if not already, right? And I just think that that is one role that at least over the next 2 decades, right, India can play as we see these next 25 years pan out. So any thoughts around because also the skills are changing, right? That the world is going to need the methodologies of which you can contribute productively. Again, you have digital and many other ways in which one can do all of that and still make an impact in other parts of the world. But any thoughts around India building the world's largest skilled workforce and what we need to do over the next again 25 years?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, just bringing it back to education, which is what I understand a little bit better, Rajan. I think the first thing is like our education system, forget addressing the present, it's still addressing the past, right? So we have to just morph in our heads to even trying to envision what will that workforce look like when our kids graduate, and what are our schools doing today? I think holding that question and having that dialogue is the starting point. I think the second is there's so much research now around some of the critical 21st century skills that our children need. As you said, our kids are going to graduate not into one job, but maybe 10, 15, 20 jobs over a lifetime. And yet they will all need communication skills. They will all need collaboration skills. They will all need to be creative. And so how do we teach those enduring 21st century skills? And I would say even over prioritize those to knowledge, because knowledge today does not need to be memorized, right? Knowledge is freely available. But I think what is going to differentiate our kids' abilities to stay ahead of the curve is how deeply they sort of embody those 21st century skills. So at Teach for India, we call them the 8 C's. We've actually made them into characters. And they are a part of everything we do. It's critical thinking, courage, compassion, communication, creativity, curiosity. Like, these are the things I think to build into the fabric of our education system.
Yeah, no, I think the C's can extend, and if you take the interplay of just curiosity and creativity, many people would discount them as similar words, but each has so much depth, and if one can hone that skill, particularly in everything, would be lovely. Shaheen, I'm just looking at the clock and I don't know how 45 minutes have gone by, but we've had a beautiful, wonderful conversation, but we cannot end this session, without really getting, a picture of what is your dream for India of 2047. So if you had to really, put your dream out there and your wish for India, maybe, I would love to hear what that means.
Yeah, I think for me, my dream for India is that we reimagine the education system fundamentally, and we do it with our children. And I think if I were to underline one word in that dream, it would be the with word. How do we really think of children truly as our partners, from the level of classroom to the highest level of policy making? Can we really reimagine alongside them?
Yeah, no, and they are the future. So obviously, if they are your partners, they will not only define the future, but probably lead India for the future and be the beneficiaries of that future. What a beautiful dream. And again, thanks so much, Shaheen, for spending these 45 minutes in this, very enriching, enlightening discussion. And I'm sure there's a lot for us to take back, particularly as as industry, as government policy, many aspects that you touched upon on how we can bring about change. But I'm going to end with one thing, that I'm going to continue to trouble you and reach out to you, to enable all of the things that you said happen again more at scale, how each person can, do a lot more than what we are doing today, and really create that, infectious energy around education, like what you said, so that it becomes one of the most important and prioritized goals for our country over the next 25 years. Thank you, for sharing this. And I'm sure we'll all see a beautiful India at 100 together.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you so much.